The ballroom at Briarwood Hall hummed with soft strings and candlelight. Arthur Collins stood near the back in a charcoal suit, hands folded to hide the pale rope-burn rings on his wrists. In his pocket, a flattened brass dog tag warmed under his thumb like tiny coal. He kept his eyes on Lena, his daughter, moving through guests in a sky-blue dress that made her look 19 again, hopeful, trying to reassure. Nathan Whitaker held court by the bar, all brightness and easy charm. He touched elbows, pointed at people as if claiming them, rehearsed smiles in the reflection of a silver ice bucket. When the MC tapped the mic, he took the sender effortlessly, slipping one hand into his tux pocket as the phones rose. "To us," Nathan said, the room smiling back. "To Lena's heart, in the future we'll build. A future not, like every story we were warned about." A ripple of laughter. His gaze slid toward the back. "Not like some men who gave up before they ever tried." Arthur's spine prickled. Sound thinned. The quartet's waltz sagged into silence. He felt the dog tag cutting a curve into his palm. Nathan lifted his glass higher, pleased with his own timing. "Here's to not ending up like her useless father." It landed like crockery breaking on tile. Someone snorted. A cousin hid a grin behind her flute. Lena's smile collapsed, her eyes fled to the floor. Arthur didn't move. He could smell champagne sugar, candle wax, the faint metallic tang of nerves. He counted his breath in 4 beats, like fire training. A cane tapped wood, 1, 2. Ezra Whitaker, Nathan's grandfather, rose from the dais with slow accuracy. He didn't ask for the microphone. He simply looked across the room at Arthur and raised his palm to his brow. The salute was sharp, exact, and shocking in its tenderness. "This man," the colonel said, voice carrying without effort, "saved my life." The air shifted. Phones lowered. The laughter went brittle and died. Nathan blinked, color draining. Lena's head snapped up. Arthur didn't speak. He steadied himself on the quiet inside him, a room with no windows, only a door he could choose to open. He did not. Not yet. Ezra's cane tip found the floor again. "House lights," he said to no one and everyone. The chandeliers brightened, tablecloth creases, sweat on brows, the honest age in faces came into view. "We owe some truth tonight." Nathan laughed too quickly. "Grandpa, it was a joke." "Was it?" Ezra asked. His eyes never left Arthur. "Then let us see who still laughs." Lena stepped away from Nathan without thinking, a small instinct that landed like thunder in both men's chests. The quartet lowered their bows. A waiter froze with a tray midair, flute chiming softly against flute. Arthur loosened his fist and let the dog tag cool against his lifeline. The room was finally quiet enough to hear what people really were. He lifted his chin. Not a speech, just breath held still for the truth that was walking toward them, cane tapping time. The hush in the ballroom felt like the pause before a storm. Chandeliers hummed faintly, casting hard light where candle glow once softened flaws. Guests who had been laughing seconds earlier now sat stiff, like actors caught forgetting their lines. Arthur Collins didn't move. He stood at the back of the hall, shoulders squared, though his heartbeat thumped with the old rhythm of combat drills. He had been silent through worse, he reminded himself. Through smoke and fire, through sirens that didn't arrive in time. Yet this silence was different, it carried eyes, hundreds of them, weighing him down. Colonel Ezra Whitaker held his salute for a long, deliberate breath. The cane in his other hand quivered faintly, but the gesture itself was crisp, exact, drilled into him decades ago. A soldier's recognition. When he lowered it, he fixed his gaze on Nathan. "This man saved my life," he repeated, his voice a command, not a story. A murmur moved through the crowd. Glasses clinked as hands shifted nervously. The quartet lowered their instruments completely, bows hanging useless at their sides. The laughter that had mocked Arthur moments before had curdled into embarrassment, then confusion. Nathan swallowed, his smug grin faltering for the first time all evening. He forced a laugh, but it landed flat. "Grandpa, I was only making a joke, everyone knows I didn't mean it." Ezra's eyes didn't leave him. Then perhaps the joke should not have been at a man's expense, least of all a man who carried me out of fire while your father fled numbers in a safe. The words struck like a stone through glass. A ripple of gasps, whispers. Lena's hand covered her mouth as if to hold something inside, a sob or a question, even she wasn't sure. Arthur remained still, though every nerve in him screamed to walk out. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence said more than 1,000 justifications. He could feel the old dog tag pressed flat against his palm, its edge digging into his skin like a reminder, not yet. Not your story to tell. Nathan's friends at the bar shifted uneasily. The best man, who had laughed loudest, was suddenly fascinated by the ice melting in his glass. The colonel tapped his cane once more, the sound echoing sharp across the marble floor. "Turn on the house lights," he ordered. The staff hesitated, then obeyed. The chandeliers flared brighter, stripping the room of shadows. No more candlelit warmth, no more soft corners to hide shame. Every guest was visible now, their expressions naked, uneasy, curious, guilty. Ezra turned toward the MC and gestured for the microphone. The man, pale now, handed it over without a word. The colonel's voice filled the room, steady but heavy. "For 30 years, I have carried a truth I should have spoken. Tonight, it must be heard." The crowd leaned forward, hungry, uncertain. Nathan paled, lips tightening into a line. His hand gripped Lena's wrist too firmly, as though to anchor her, but she pulled free with a sharp flick of her arm. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. He knew what was coming. He had kept the secret buried so long, his own daughter had grown believing him a coward. The colonel was about to rip that coffin open, and with it, every memory Arthur had swallowed to protect others. Ezra's voice lowered, but the room was so still it carried. "The man you mock is useless carried me on his back through fire. I walked again because he chose me over himself. And the lie that marked him after, that lie was mine to stop, but I let it stand. Tonight, it ends." A gasp tore from Lena's throat. Arthur's hand twitched, the dog tag slipping slightly in his pocket. The moment he had avoided for decades was walking toward him, carried by the very man who once asked him for silence. Nathan took a step forward, voice cracking. "You can't." But the colonel raised his hand, silencing him. His eyes never wavered. "Yes. I can. And I will." The room braced, hearts tightening. The air itself seemed to wait for the next blow, knowing that once the first truth was spoken, no one in that hall would leave unchanged. The ballroom was suffocating with whispers, 100 voices hushed but buzzing like trapped bees. Arthur stood still in the light, but his instincts pulled him toward shadow. He wasn't a man built for spotlights. His whole life, after the fire, had been about staying small, unseen, letting the world forget his name. Colonel Ezra Whitaker tapped his cane once more. "Arthur," he said firmly, "come with me." Arthur hesitated. All eyes pressed into his back, waiting, judging, desperate for spectacle. He unclenched his fist, the brass dog tag slick with sweat, and followed the colonel toward a side door near the stage. The click of Ezra's cane echoed in rhythm with Arthur's shoes against the marble floor. Nathan's voice broke through behind them. "Grandpa." Nathan snapped, desperation cracking through his polished tone. "You're making a fool of yourself. This is my night." Ezra didn't look back. "Your night has already spoken for itself." The door closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the chatter. Inside was a small anteroom, lit by a single lamp that gave off a yellow glow. It smelled faintly of old wood polish and eucalyptus from some forgotten arrangement. Silence hung, heavy but fragile. The colonel leaned on his cane, shoulders rigid, as if holding his entire weight with pride alone. Arthur stood across from him, back straight, his hands clasped in front of him. For a moment neither spoke. Finally, Ezra drew a slow breath. "I've carried the weight too long. Tonight, I nearly choked on it." His eyes dropped briefly to Arthur's pocket. "You still have it, don't you?" Arthur's hand brushed the outline of the dog tag, then withdrew it. The brass gleamed dully under the lamplight, edges worn, letters faded, E. Whitaker. He held it out, but Ezra didn't take it. "It should have stayed yours," Arthur said. His voice was low, almost gravel. "I only kept it because it reminded me of the choice I made. Who I carried first." Ezra's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered with something raw, shame, maybe. "You chose right. My son was already lost the moment he lit that match." Arthur's throat closed. For 30 years, those words had been locked behind his ribs. To hear them spoken aloud, so plainly, felt like being punched in the chest. He turned away, blinking hard. "You told me," Arthur said, voice rough, "that silence would protect Lena. That the lie was a shield for her future. I believed you. But you let her grow up thinking her father was a coward." Ezra's cane pressed hard into the floor. His knuckles whitened. "I thought mercy would grow into kindness. I thought my grandson would carry honor forward, not arrogance. But tonight," he shook his head. "He has proven the soil is rotten." Arthur stared at the dog tag in his palm, fingers trembling. "What do you want from me, Ezra? To expose him here, in front of her? To shame him into breaking? That's not revenge. That's destruction." The colonel met his eyes, gaze hard but wet at the corners. "Sometimes destruction is mercy when arrogance burns everything it touches." Arthur said nothing. He could feel the weight of years pressing down on both of them. The truth they'd buried wasn't just about the fire, it was about the choices afterward, the pact that had chained them both in silence. Outside the door, a faint shuffle, shoes against carpet. Arthur's instinct sharpened. He moved quickly, twisting the handle to pull the door open. There stood Nathan. His jaw was tight, his face pale, but his eyes gleamed with the hunger of a man who'd overheard enough to know there was something powerful, something dangerous, just beyond his reach. "So," Nathan said, forcing a smirk to hide the panic in his throat. "That's what this is about." Arthur and Ezra exchanged a glance. The storm outside hadn't ended, it was only just beginning. Nathan leaned on the doorframe as though he owned it, but his hand twitched against the wood. His smirk faltered under the dim light of the side room. "I knew you didn't just show up to smile for pictures, old man," he said to Arthur, his voice low, carrying a bite. "But I didn't think you'd drag Grandpa into your pity act." Arthur's jaw tightened, though he didn't rise to the bait. Ezra's cane struck the floor sharply. "You will lower your voice in this room, Nathan." For a flicker, Nathan's face twitched, but then he straightened, laughing too loudly. "Of course. You've both been working on your story for years, haven't you?" Sad old Arthur, the forgotten hero. "What's next? Will you tell the guests he built this ballroom with his bare hands?" Arthur's silence unnerved him more than a retort. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small USB stick, sliding it onto the table between them. The tiny object looked almost harmless, but Ezra's eyes fixed on it. "What is this?" the colonel asked. Arthur's voice was calm but cut with iron. "Proof. Not of the fire. That would take more than a stick to untangle. This is Nathan, in his own words." Nathan's grin stiffened. "What are you?" Arthur finally looked him in the eye. "The recordings from the restaurant where you berated the waiter until he quit on the spot. The emails where you mocked your engineers and claimed their work as yours. The phone call where you called Lena's future a transaction and her father dead weight." Nathan's mask cracked. His face blanched before flushing red, but his words came quick. "You think anyone cares? That's business. That's how the world works." Ezra stepped closer, voice low with fury. "No. That's how arrogance works." The silence afterward was thick, suffocating. The colonel picked up the USB and slid it into his breast pocket as carefully as if it were a bullet. Nathan's eyes followed it, fear tightening his throat though he tried to hold his smirk. Arthur crossed his arms, his posture unflinching. "You can pretend in public, Nathan. Smile, laugh, shake hands. But it always leaks out in small ways, the cruel little things. How you treat people who can't fight back. How you hide behind power you didn't earn. Nathan stepped forward, his voice strained, his jaw shaking. You think you can ruin me with that? You think anyone in that ballroom cares if I snapped at a waiter? Arthur didn't blink. It's not the waiter they'll care about. It's the pattern. The proof. One drop of truth in the right place spreads like ink across linen. Ezra's cane pressed hard into the floor as he straightened his back. His eyes were no longer wet with shame, they burned with decision. This ends tonight, he said, each word deliberate. Not for Arthur. For Lena. The weight of his voice made Nathan step back involuntarily. His smirk collapsed completely now, leaving only the raw edge of panic. Arthur slipped the dog tag back into his pocket. His voice was quiet, steady. Your joke was the last straw. You mocked me, yes, but what matters is you mocked her. And you showed the world what kind of man you are. For the first time that night, Nathan had nothing to say. His lips moved, but no words came. From beyond the door, faint music swelled again, the band resuming in the main hall. It sounded wrong, out of place, too elegant for the storm gathering in that small, dim room. Ezra looked at Arthur, then back at Nathan. We'll give the truth its stage, he said grimly. And tonight, the world will see you clearly. Nathan's eyes darted to the door, then back to the pocket where the USB now rested against Ezra's chest. He swallowed hard, realizing that for the first time in his charmed life, control was slipping through his fingers. Arthur turned toward the door, voice flat. Then let's go back in. Nathan's breath hitched. He stayed frozen in the doorway as Arthur and Ezra walked past him. For all his bravado, his legs felt heavy, as though the very floor had turned against him. Out in the hall, the chandeliers still burned too bright. Guests leaned close, whispering. The air was thick with the anticipation of a revelation. And Nathan, for once, no longer felt like the man at the center of the room, he felt like the boy about to be exposed. The ballroom buzzed like a hive, the whispers thick and restless. Guests had half risen from their chairs, drinks forgotten, eyes fixed on the side door. When it opened, Arthur and Colonel Ezra stepped back inside. The chandelier light caught them both, washing away the shadows that had shielded Arthur for years. Nathan followed a step behind, face pale but lips pressed into the thinnest version of a smile. He walked quickly, trying to get ahead of them, trying to reclaim the stage. But Ezra's cane struck the marble floor in steady rhythm, tap, 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 pulling all eyes his way. Ladies and gentlemen, Ezra said, his voice carrying without a microphone. It seems my grandson has forgotten that tonight is not a night for lies. The room hushed instantly. Even the waiters froze in place, trays trembling in their hands. The quartet, uncertain, lowered their bows again. Arthur remained a step back, his posture rigid. He wasn't comfortable here, but his silence had weight now. He could feel it pressing against Nathan's shrinking bravado. Ezra motioned to the MC for the microphone. The man, sweating under the lights, handed it over without a word. Ezra stood tall despite the cane, his face stern, his eyes sharp. Some of you, Ezra began, laughed at a cruel joke just moments ago. You laughed because it was easy. Because you thought there was truth in it. Because you thought the man standing in the back, he pointed toward Arthur, was as useless as my grandson claimed. A ripple of shame moved through the guests. Eyes darted to the floor, to champagne glasses, anywhere but Arthur. Ezra's hand tightened on the microphone. But I will not let that lie breathe any longer. The truth has lived in silence for 30 years, and tonight, it ends. Arthur's stomach knotted. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made his chest tighten. His thumb pressed hard into the dog tag in his pocket, grounding him. Ezra's voice grew heavier. There was a fire. Many of you remember it, the warehouse blaze that took my son. The papers printed a story of cowardice, of abandonment. They showed this man as one who fled while others burned. He paused, letting the weight of the lie hang over them. Nathan's smile twitched. Grandpa. Ezra raised his cane, silencing him. But that story was false. my son lit that fire himself, for insurance. And when the building collapsed, it was Arthur Collins who carried me out through the flames. It was Arthur who went back for my son, only to find him lost to his own greed. It was Arthur who bore the shame I allowed to stand. The room gasped as if the air itself had been struck. A woman near the front clasped her pearls. Someone dropped a glass, it shattered across the floor, sharp and final. Arthur closed his eyes, the memories flooding back, the weight of Ezra over his shoulder, the sound of beams snapping, the roar of fire eating everything. He had carried those sounds alone for decades. Ezra's voice dropped to a low growl. For 30 years, Arthur lived with the world believing he was a coward. And why? Because I asked it of him. Because I thought silence would protect my family's name. All eyes turned toward Nathan now. His polished mask had slipped, revealing panic beneath. His friends at the bar looked away, pretending to study their drinks. Lena stood near the dais, her hands trembling, her face pale with shock. Her eyes darted between her father and Nathan, searching for something steady. Ezra lifted an envelope from his blazer, placing it on the table in front of him. The sound was sharp, deliberate. "This," he said, "is proof that Nathan's succession to my board is suspended. The evidence inside will be enough for the board to see the man he truly is." Gasps rippled again. Cameras shifted, trying to capture the envelope. Nathan's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked like a man suddenly aware of a trap he'd walked into himself. Arthur finally raised his head, eyes sweeping the room. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than Nathan's weak protests. The lights were too bright now, too honest. Every whisper in the room cut like a blade, and for the first time in his life, Nathan felt the weight of being truly seen. The envelope sat on the table like a loaded weapon. Small, unassuming, but everyone in the ballroom could feel its weight. The cream-colored paper bore the Whitaker family crest in deep green wax, authority pressed into every corner. Nathan's breath hitched. He stepped forward, forcing a grin, his voice too loud. "This is ridiculous. Grandpa, you wouldn't humiliate your own family in front of strangers. This is theater." Ezra didn't flinch. His voice carried like iron wrapped in velvet. "It is justice, Nathan. The kind you can't charm your way out of." He tapped his cane once, the sounds snapping through the silence. "Inside this envelope are records, your emails, recordings, testimony from those you exploited. The board will see them on Friday. But tonight, your mask comes off." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, the sound of polite society unraveling. Guests shifted in their chairs, unease flashing across their faces as though they'd just realized they had cheered for the wrong side of the story. Arthur stood off to the side, silent, his hands folded. His heart pounded but his face was stone. He had brought Ezra the evidence weeks ago, piece by piece, because it wasn't the fire alone that revealed character, but the small cruelties that followed. Nathan's eyes darted toward Arthur, venom spilling through his forced smile. "So this is your plan? Dig up dirt, whisper into my grandfather's ear, and play the victim to steal back some dignity?" His laugh rang hollow. "You've lived your whole life a coward, Arthur. You think this pity stunt will change that?" Arthur didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of Ezra's presence, the truth in his voice, made Nathan's words shrivel before they landed. Ezra leaned closer to the microphone. "This man you call a coward carried me through flames. He gave up his reputation so that widows of workers could keep their pensions, so your family name wouldn't be destroyed. And in return, you call him useless." His voice hardened. "You are not worthy of the legacy you've been handed." The words cracked through the air like gunfire. Gasps followed. Lena trembled where she stood. She clutched the edge of the table as though the ground itself was tilting. Her eyes met her father's across the room, eyes filled with confusion, shame, but also something else beginning to stir, recognition. Nathan saw her shift, and panic burned through his carefully curated charm. He reached for her hand quickly, squeezing too tight. "Lena, don't listen to this. He's twisting things. He's bitter, jealous. His voice dropped low, frantic. We have a future, you and me. Don't let him ruin it. But Lena's fingers pulled free. The tremor in her hands steadied into resolve. She turned to face him, her voice sharp enough to cut the murmurs around them. Future? Is that what you call mocking my father in front of everyone? Is that what you call leverage? Nathan froze. The word, leverage, hit like a slap. He realized too late that Arthur had given Ezra more than just proof of petty cruelties. He'd given him the recordings. The damning words Nathan had spoken when he thought no one was listening. Ezra placed a hand on the envelope. His gaze swept the crowd, steady, unblinking. This is not about one cruel toast. It is about the man beneath it, the man who treats love as currency, people as tools, and legacy as a prize to be stolen. Tonight, I stripped that prize from him. The crowd erupted in whispers again, louder this time, like a storm breaking. Nathan lunged toward the envelope, but Ezra's cane struck down on the table with a crack that echoed like thunder. Nathan froze, humiliated, his chest heaving. Arthur stepped forward for the first time, his voice low but carrying. It's over, Nathan. For the first time that evening, Nathan looked small, his shoulders hunched, his face pale, the falcon cufflinks at his wrists glinting like cruel jokes under the harsh lights. The envelope remained sealed, but the truth inside was already loose, wrapping around him like smoke he couldn't escape. The ballroom was no longer a celebration, it was a trial by fire. Guests shifted in their seats, caught between curiosity and discomfort. Every whisper carried Nathan's name now, not Lena's. And in the center of it all, Lena stood frozen, her engagement ring catching the chandelier light like a cruel spotlight. Nathan's voice shook, though he tried to cover it with bravado. Enough. This is nothing but old men spinning stories. Nobody here cares about some warehouse fire 30 years ago. They care about success. They care about the future I'm building with Lena. He turned toward her, plastering on the smile that had charmed investors and politicians alike. Tell them, Lena. Tell them you believe in us. But Lena didn't answer. Her fingers trembled as she touched the ring on her hand. Her chest rose and fell, shallow breaths fighting against the tightness in her throat. She looked at her father, standing quietly at the edge of the room, then at Nathan, his mask cracking under the weight of exposure. The silence was unbearable. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady enough to slice through the room. When you made that toast, do you know what hurt most? Nathan blinked, taken aback. It was a joke. It wasn't a joke, Lena interrupted, louder now. Her voice shook, but her eyes sharpened. It was the truth you carry inside you. You look at my father and see a man you can step on. And you thought humiliating him would make you look stronger. Gasps rippled again. Nathan's cheeks flushed crimson. He reached for her hand desperately, but she pulled it back. The gesture was sharp, final. Lena, he said, his voice cracking. I was nervous, people expect something witty. Her hand moved to the ring. Slowly, painfully, she twisted it. The gold band resisted at first, but then slipped free with a metallic whisper. She held it between her fingers, her breath uneven. My father has been silent my whole life, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I thought it was because he was ashamed. Tonight I learned he was silent because he carried a weight none of us understood. And you, she turned the ring toward Nathan, her voice trembling with fury, you tried to turn his silence into a punchline. The room was dead still. All eyes locked on her. She placed the ring firmly in Nathan's palm. I don't want a life built on cruelty. I won't marry a man who treats people as leverage. I won't marry you. The words hit harder than Ezra's cane, harder than the truth of the fire. Nathan staggered back, staring at the ring in his hand as though it had turned into a shard of glass. His carefully groomed confidence collapsed into raw panic. You can't just, his voice broke, desperate, but no one moved to support him. His friends looked away, their loyalty melting under the shame flooding the room. Arthur watched from the side, his throat tight. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted his daughter's future destroyed in public, but he couldn't deny the flicker of pride swelling in his chest. For once, Lena wasn't looking away. She was standing taller than he had ever seen her. Ezra leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice low but cutting through every corner of the hall. The ring is not the only thing that unhooks tonight. So does the lie. So does the legacy my grandson tried to steal. Lena's hand shook as she let go of the table, but her eyes didn't waver. Nathan, clutching the ring as if it were slipping through his fingers, looked around the room, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to stand with him. No one did. The sound of the quartet resuming their music was thin, almost mocking. It was no longer a song of celebration, it was a dirge for a man who had lost everything in a single evening. The music faltered again when Colonel Ezra raised his hand. The quartet stopped mid-note, their bows frozen in the air. No one dared move as the old man steadied himself on his cane and took the microphone once more. His breath was heavy, but his voice carried like steel drawn from a scabbard. "I owe you more than a correction," Ezra said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I owe you the truth. All of it." Arthur shifted uneasily at the edge of the crowd. He had never wanted this, an audience, strangers hanging on the story of his life like gossip over wine glasses. Yet now, as Ezra's words filled the hall, the silence around them demanded the truth be spoken. Ezra's eyes dropped, his tone softening for a moment. "My son lit that fire. Not Arthur. Not some accident. It was greed. He wanted insurance money, and it cost him his life." A ripple of gasps tore through the guests. Some clutched their pearls, others muttered too loudly, their whispers spilling like smoke. The Whitaker family name was sacred in this city, untouchable. And now the patriarch himself was tearing the foundation apart. Ezra pressed on. "I asked Arthur to remain silent because I feared what the scandal would do to my family, to the workers depending on us, to the pensions tied to that building. He agreed. He bore the shame of a coward so that widows could still put food on their tables. He carried my burden while I let him take the blows." Arthur's throat tightened. He had carried those words for decades, but hearing them spoken aloud cut deep, reopening wounds he thought had scarred over. Ezra's voice dropped lower. "I thought mercy would give my grandson a chance to grow into a better man than his father. But I was wrong. Tonight proved it. The arrogance, the cruelty, it is the same fire, just in a different body." All eyes turned to Nathan. He stood in the center, pale and sweating, clutching the engagement ring Lena had given back. He shook his head frantically, his voice breaking. "No, you don't understand. He's lying to protect himself. They're both lying." But his words landed limp. The crowd no longer believed him. The authority in his voice had withered. Lena stared at Nathan with tears streaking her face, her body trembling. She had grown up believing her father's silence meant weakness, that his small life was proof of his failure. And now, in the harsh light of truth, she realized it had been sacrifice. She turned to Arthur, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Arthur swallowed hard. He wanted to explain, but words felt like splinters in his throat. At last he said quietly, "Because you deserve to grow up free of it. I thought if you hated me, at least you wouldn't carry the shame." Lena's knees weakened. She braced against the table, sobbing openly now, while Nathan tried to reach for her. "Don't believe this. He's just an old man hiding behind his war stories. I'm your future, Lena. Not them." She slapped his hand away. "You're nothing like my future. You're the shadow of your father's greed. And I won't follow you into the same flames." The words cut Nathan deeper than any board decision could. His eyes darted wildly, as though searching for an exit. His friends had abandoned him, the crowd had turned against him, and the family name he had leaned on like a crutch was slipping away under his feet. Ezra placed a folded sheet of yellowed paper on the table beside the envelope. The edges were frayed, the ink faded, but the signature was unmistakable, his own, written 3 decades earlier. "If the boy ever harms others by using Arthur's silence," Ezra read aloud, you are released from the pact. Speak the truth, and let it fall where it may. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs again. Nathan staggered back, his mouth open, realizing the trap had been set long before he was even old enough to step into it. Arthur closed his eyes, exhaling as if a weight he had carried for half a lifetime had finally begun to loosen. The paper truth was out. And with it, the last excuse Nathan had ever clung to burned away. The ballroom trembled with whispers, the sound swelling like a storm tide. Ezra's words in the yellowed paper had stripped away Nathan's armor, but Nathan was not the type to collapse quietly. His jaw clenched, his face pale, yet his eyes darted with manic calculation. He suddenly stepped forward, raising his voice over the crowd. This is a circus. You think one old letter, one sob story, will erase decades of failure? His words cracked, but he forced them out louder. You want truth? I'll give you truth. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumbs flying over the screen. A moment later, every guest's phone vibrated at once. Murmurs turned to gasps as notifications lit up. Arthur's stomach sank. He knew the look on Nathan's face, the grin of a man who had planned for his own downfall. Check your inboxes, Nathan sneered, his voice dripping venom. I sent you all a file. Recordings. Articles. Proof of what Arthur really is. He's not a hero, he's a liar who walked away from that fire. A coward who let people die while he saved himself. Guests scrambled with their phones, eyes scanning the message. Screens glowed across the room. Lena's hands shook as she opened hers, but her expression hardened as she read. Arthur's chest burned. He knew exactly what Nathan had done. For years, he'd carried the newspaper clipping that painted him as a coward. He'd hidden it in drawers, tucked it in his wallet, sometimes even stared at it late at night like a punishment. Nathan must have dug it up, spun it with venom, and now released it as his shield. You see? Nathan pressed, voice wild, desperate. This man ruined his own name. He's been feeding you lies to get sympathy. He's trying to steal what belongs to me. But as the guests scrolled, confusion spread. The articles were old, yellowed, archived scans. The recordings were crudely spliced, Arthur's words taken out of context, him muttering to himself late at night, stitched together into something ugly. It was desperate, and it showed. Lena lowered her phone slowly, her voice trembling but clear. You sent this? You planned this? Nathan faltered, realizing too late the tone in her voice. I had to. He's trying to take everything from me. Ezra straightened on his cane, fire sparking in his voice. No, Nathan. What you've just shown everyone is your own corruption. Lies stitched together to smear a man who bore yours for 3 decades. Arthur finally stepped forward, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise. You think I'm afraid of the truth? I carried your father's shame, your grandfather's silence, and my daughter's hatred. Do you really think your scraps of paper can break me now? The room went still. Arthur's words rang truer than Nathan's frantic deflections. Nathan's mask cracked completely. Sweat slicked his forehead. His friends had already slipped away to avoid association. Guests were shaking their heads, disgust replacing curiosity. The air that once bent to Nathan's charm now recoiled from him. Ezra pulled the envelope from his blazer and laid it atop the yellowed letter. His voice boomed. This board will not see your file, Nathan. They will see mine. And they will see the man you tried to destroy standing taller than you ever will. Lena's tears streaked her cheeks, but her voice was firm as she whispered, I don't even know who you are anymore. Nathan's hand trembled. He opened his mouth to speak but no words came. He looked at the crowd, once his audience, now his jury, and realized there was no rescue, no spin, no charm that could salvage him. For the first time, Nathan Whitaker looked small. And Arthur Collins, the man he had mocked as useless, stood unbroken in the bright light of truth. The weight in the ballroom had shifted. Where Nathan once commanded the stage with his smile and easy arrogance, now he looked like a drowning man, thrashing in waters too deep. His evidence sat in the guest's hands, flimsy and transparent, while Ezra's letter and envelope burned with authority on the table. Arthur's silence filled the space more than Nathan's shouting ever had. His shoulders were straight, his hands calm at his sides, his eyes steady. For decades he had borne the lie as if it were a second skin. Tonight, that skin was being stripped away, exposing what he had really carried. Lena turned toward him, trembling. "Dad, why?" Her voice cracked, thick with years of unanswered questions. "Why didn't you tell me? Why let me grow up thinking you were ashamed?" Arthur drew a slow breath. He had never wanted this moment, not here, not in front of hundreds of eyes, but now it pressed against him, demanding to be spoken. He stepped toward the microphone Ezra had left on the table. The room hushed, leaning in. "I stayed silent," Arthur began, his voice gravel but steady, "because speaking would have destroyed more lives than it saved. If I'd told the truth 30 years ago, Ezra's company would have collapsed. Hundreds of workers would have lost their pensions. Widows would have gone hungry. Children would have grown up without support. I chose to carry the lie, so they didn't have to." A murmur rippled, heavier than any gasp so far. The words weren't dramatic, they were simple, grounded, undeniable. Arthur's gaze swept the room, then landed on Lena. His voice cracked as he continued. "And you, Lena. I thought if you hated me, at least you'd be free of it. I thought you'd grow up without the weight of shame, even if you carried anger instead." Lena's face crumpled, tears spilling freely now. She covered her mouth, a sob escaping despite herself. The guests shifted uncomfortably, many lowering their eyes, the cruelty of their earlier laughter pressing back at them like guilt. Nathan, red-faced and shaking, snapped. "Don't listen to him. He's spinning his own sob story to make you pity him. He let people die." Arthur turned toward him, eyes sharp. "I went back into that fire for your father. I tried. But some choices can't be undone once they're made. I dragged Ezra out because his breath was shallow and fading. By the time I reached your father, the ceiling came down. You can believe what you want, Nathan. But the truth doesn't bend to arrogance." Ezra's cane struck the floor once, punctuating the moment. "Arthur bore my son's sins so that others could live in peace. And what have you borne, Nathan? Nothing but your own ego." Nathan's mouth opened, but no words came. His hands shook, the engagement ring still clutched in his palm like a curse. The ballroom was silent, thick with shame, grief, and revelation. And then, slowly, Arthur pulled the folded newspaper clipping from his jacket, the very article that had branded him a coward. He held it up for all to see. The yellowed paper trembled slightly in his hand. "This," Arthur said quietly, "has been my punishment for 30 years. I kept it with me every day. I read it when the nights were too long. I let it remind me of what people thought I was. But tonight," he tore the clipping in half, the sound sharp and final, "it dies here." Gasps echoed, but no one laughed. The act was simple, but it struck harder than any speech. Arthur stepped back, the weight of years slipping from his shoulders. Lena moved toward him, tears streaking her face, and for the first time in her adult life she didn't hesitate to take his arm. Nathan, meanwhile, looked utterly hollow. His last move had failed. His lies were ashes in his mouth. The legacy he had tried to seize now turned to dust beneath his fingers. The heavy twist was no longer about Arthur's shame. It was about Nathan's collapse, and the truth that his grandfather and even the city itself would never see him the same way again. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration hall, it had transformed into a courtroom, and Nathan Whitaker stood on trial with no defense left. His face was pale, his tuxedo jacket clinging awkwardly to sweat-stained shoulders, his carefully crafted confidence shattered. Every whisper in the crowd was a verdict against him. Colonel Ezra Whitaker rested one hand on the table, the other steadying his cane. His voice, though heavy with age, carried command. "It isn't enough to expose you, Nathan. The damage you've done must be repaired. Tonight is not only about truth, it is about consequences." Nathan's chest heaved as he tried to laugh, though it came out thin and cracked. Consequences? What are you going to do, Grandpa? Disown me at a party? Take me out of your will? He sneered, forcing bravado he no longer believed in. Go ahead. Everyone here knows blood is thicker than paper. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Blood means nothing if it carries rot. He tapped the envelope on the table. This evidence goes to the board. You will not inherit my chair. You will not touch the company that generations before you built with sweat and sacrifice. Gasps rippled across the room. The Whitaker board was legend in the city, a dynasty. Stripping Nathan of succession was more than humiliation, it was erasure from history. Arthur finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it carried steel that silenced the whispers. I don't want your money, Nathan. I don't want your seat. I don't even want your apology. But I will name my terms. All eyes turned to him. For 30 years, Arthur Collins had been the shadow in the back of the room. Now, every light in Briarwood Hall burned on him. He took a slow breath. First, a public apology. Not whispered in a corner, not hidden in paperwork. Printed, signed, published in the same paper that branded me a coward. Ezra nodded once, already in agreement. It will be done. Arthur's gaze shifted back to Nathan. Second, restitution. Every employee who was cheated under your schemes, every pensioner you cut corners on, they'll be made whole. Paid back from your trust. Not Ezra's. Yours. Nathan's face drained of color. You can't. Ezra cut him off. I can. And it will be executed by legal counsel before the week ends. Arthur's voice sharpened. Third, the engineer you mocked, the one whose resignation you laughed at after stealing her work? A scholarship in her name. Fully funded, indefinitely. No young mind should be crushed because of arrogance like yours. The crowd murmured in approval now. For the first time that evening, people looked at Arthur not with pity, but with respect. Nathan staggered back, his hands trembling. You're destroying me. Arthur's eyes were cold. No, Nathan. You destroyed yourself. I'm just pulling the curtain back so everyone can see it. Ezra's cane struck the marble floor, sealing the terms like a gavel. So it is decided. Nathan's breathing turned ragged. He clutched the engagement ring still in his palm, staring at Lena. Say something. Tell them you don't agree. Tell them you still want this. Lena's eyes were red, her hands trembling, but her voice was steady. What I want is a man who knows love isn't leverage. That will never be you. The words broke him more than any board decision could. Nathan staggered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. No ally, no escape, no legacy left. Arthur looked at his daughter, his chest tight with emotion. He had endured humiliation for decades to shield others, but tonight, for the first time, he felt the sting of true justice, not for him, but for everyone Nathan had trampled. The terms of revenge had been spoken. And for the first time, Nathan Whitaker understood there was no bargaining with them. The room held its breath, waiting for what the final blow would be. The chandeliers still blazed, but the warmth they once carried was gone. Now they burned with an unforgiving clarity, exposing every trembling face in the ballroom. The celebration was over, what remained was aftermath. Nathan Whitaker stood alone at the center, a broken figure clutching the engagement ring like a shard of glass cutting into his palm. His charm, his smirk, his carefully curated life had all crumbled. His eyes darted desperately between guests, searching for a sympathetic look, a lifeline, but found only avoidance. Friends who had once clung to his orbit now turned away, whispering with disgust. Arthur Collins did not gloat. He stood near the dais, shoulders heavy but finally unbowed, his silence speaking louder than Nathan's collapse. He had carried 30 years of shame, but tonight, in front of hundreds, that burden had burned away. Lena moved toward him slowly, her eyes wet, her breath shaky. For the first time in years, she didn't avoid looking at her father. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. I hated you for so long, she whispered, her voice breaking. And all this time, you were protecting everyone, even me. Arthur swallowed hard, his voice low and cracked. I thought if you hated me, at least you'd be free of the weight. I never wanted you to carry what I carried. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. You won't carry it alone anymore. The room seemed to exhale, as though the bond between father and daughter was the only truth left to steady it. Colonel Ezra Whitaker, leaning heavily on his cane, spoke again, his voice softer now but still commanding. Tonight ends more than an engagement. It ends a lie that should never have lived. Tomorrow, the papers will hear from me. The board will hear from me. The world will know who Arthur Collins is. Arthur nodded, but his eyes were fixed on Lena, not the crowd. For once, he didn't care what the world thought. Nathan staggered forward suddenly, his voice shrill, breaking under desperation. You can't erase me. You think this ends me? I'll rebuild, I'll make them see you're nothing, Arthur. You'll always be nothing. But no one moved to stop him, no one believed him. Even his voice seemed to echo back empty in the vast hall. The falcon cufflinks on his wrists gleamed in the harsh light, symbols of arrogance stripped bare. He dropped the ring on the floor with a metallic clink that echoed through the silence, then stormed out of the hall, his footsteps hollow and furious. The doors slammed behind him, cutting him off from the family name he thought untouchable. A hush followed, heavy with finality. Slowly, the quartet lowered their bows once more, knowing there was no music that could fit this moment. Ezra turned toward Arthur. He reached into his blazer and withdrew the yellowed letter once more, pressing it into Arthur's hand. I should have spoken long ago. Let this be my apology, not in whispers, but in print, for all to see. Arthur looked down at the letter, the ink faded but the weight of it heavier than any paper he had ever held. For the first time, he felt the chains of silence fall completely away. Outside, dawn had begun to creep over the horizon, faint light spilling through tall windows. It painted the ballroom in shades of gray and gold, the kind of light that doesn't lie. Arthur turned to Lena, his lips curving into the smallest, rarest of smiles. Come on, he said softly. Let's go before the sun finishes rising. I know a diner that still makes pancakes the way you liked as a kid. She laughed through her tears, clinging to his arm as if afraid to let go. Together, they walked out under the fading glow of the chandeliers, leaving behind the hall, the lies, and the wreckage of Nathan's arrogance. And as the heavy doors closed behind them, Arthur Collins, once branded a coward, stepped into the clean, honest light of morning, no longer carrying the fire alone.